Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about
I'm curious about
Building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
Hi, my name is Effy Blue, and this is the Curious Fox podcast. Curious Fox is a community for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. Every month, we pick a theme anchored in these subjects. I invite a diverse set of panelists, and we bravely explore the theme through personal stories. This month, we tackle the multifaceted relationships with our Metamours. A Metamour is your lover's lover, your partner's girlfriend, your husband's boyfriend. It's the other in a non-monogamous relationship. As I explain in this episode, to me, the Metamour relationship is the most interesting dynamic in non-monogamy. There are no models or rule book when it comes to these relationships. In fact, society tells us to expect threat, competition, conflict, hurt, heartbreak, when two people love the same person. And this month, Lola, one of our panelists, certainly shares stories of a Metamour relationship gone wrong. We are human after all. We also hear from Kitty, who lives with her two partners who are not in a relationship with one another. She shares with us the domestic bliss they've achieved after a lot of communication and a dedication to integrity, kindness, and generosity. This theme of good communication is echoed by Amber, who talks about winning over her reluctant Metamour through consistent outreach and warm communication. These are complex relationships with little to no roadmap to guide us. Whether you choose to have a relationship with your partner's partner or not, there's a lot to be gained from seeing the individual they are, respecting and honoring their existence in your life, and remaining open-minded to all the possibilities. Curious Fox socials are not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Enjoy the episode.
So I will start by introducing my friend Amber here, who's a non-traditional relationship wedding planner. I would love for her to tell a bit about herself.
Thank you, Effy. Hi, friends. My name is Amber D'Amato. I consider myself polyamorous. I have one non-binary partner that is married to someone else. And then I also date a couple. And so I feel that right now in those relationships, I feel like I'm thriving. I'm having a really good time. I love them very much. I feel very loved and cared for in those relationships. And I feel like I appreciate Curious Fox because I can't make it all the time, but I am very grateful to Curious Fox and to Effy specifically for sort of teaching me a little bit how to navigate polyamory and ethical non-monogamy. Because before these relationships, I was with someone for many years on and off in sort of a poly-ish relationship that was basically just like an open relationship, like minus the good communication. And I knew that I like always liked the idea of an open relationship, and I was okay with us like having like sex with other people, but I really wanted that communication too. And so when that long time relationship ended, I met Effy, and we spent a lot of time together as friends, but also just in her professional work. I really admire what she does. And so I feel like I've learned some really good tools, and I feel like I'm grateful for them. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. And to my left, I have Dirty Lola, who's this podcaster and dildo swinger, that's what you say. Dildo slinger, yeah. Lola has an amazing podcast called Sex at a Go-Go. It's
and a live show.
And the live show, it's a sex ed variety show with Q&A. So check that one out. But I'll get you to intro yourself.
Hi, I'm Lola, Dirty Lola. I go by either. Miss Dirty if you're nasty. Yeah, I'm a edutainer. That's mostly what I deal in as far as the education that I like to dole out. I work in a sex shop in Williamsburg called Shag, and I do a whole bunch of other stuff. I have like 8 jobs filming a web series right now. It's just like a lot of stuff. People are like, what do you do? I don't know. A lot. So right now I'm in the midst of divorce because I don't know how else to describe it until you sign the paperwork. So I finally moved out. I was like we were living together like Bert and Ernie. That was like the running joke because we had 2 beds because I'm not sleeping in the bed you're fucking this new person in without me. So yeah, that's great. But I'm living on my own again after 17 years. We met, I know, my whole goddamn life. Yeah, we met when I was 19 and I'm 37 and I'm like, oh, I don't think I've ever functioned as an adult without adult supervision. I mean, because that's what happens. You become like codependent and you're like, hey, do this thing. And then I'm like, oh, this is great. But also I have a long distance partner who kind of came along at the tail end of my marriage ending, who is amazing and really helped me get through 2018 in a less tragic way of like not feeling loved. And I got to experience that oil and water part of polyamory where your life is falling apart and everything is awful, but your heart is bursting and full of love and it's happening simultaneously. And you're not sure if you're crying in the shower because you're so happy or you're so sad. So that was my life with 2018, but 2019 has been pretty fucking amazing, both career-wise and love-wise, and coming out of a space of trauma and into this space of trust and like, okay, you're not that person and this isn't that relationship. So yeah, it's good times. Yeah. It's good.
Hopeful ending. Yeah. Before I move on, do you want to give us a little background how you got to be non-monogamous?
It just happened. No. I was in year 10 of the 17-year relationship and super unhappy and had an affair and realized during that affair that like I didn't want to leave. And it wasn't like I don't love you. It was like I'm kind of bored, but also like looking for something else. And it was with a first boyfriend. It's like my life. It was the boyfriend who broke up with me in high school, who I was the most in love with, came back into my life to apologize. Like everything you ever wanted, to get that letter from like that boy who like made you feel like shit. And they're like, I'm sorry. And I want to see you. And I saw you online and you look so good and you want to go have drinks. That shit is poison. Just say no because you will have an affair. But that affair was... It's what got me to kind of look inward and realize like I've been so unhappy because I was living a very poly kind of existence in my teens and I had multiple partners and I shut that down because I didn't know it was a viable relationship structure and I thought I was just being super slutty and that like that perfect person will come around and take the sluttiness out of you and you get married and you're cured and monogamous and happy because that's what they tell you. So like through that, and it took us like maybe 2 or 3 years to like fully open, and like maybe the first red flag should have been when he met the person my ex left me for his Metamour. We'll talk about that, but to go be monogamous. But the first red flag should have been he never wanted to be polyamorous until he started dating her, and then it was like okay, and I was like jackpot for me, but also well, I'm just gonna go with it. But we had a fruitful time, and I always say I'm not upset we're getting a divorce because we don't need to be together. If we want to be different, live different kind of relationship styles. I was upset about all the other crap we'll talk about tonight, but that's how I've gotten here, and I'm kind of redefining my poly and who I am as a single person. Because it's like, am I single if I have a boyfriend that lives in another state? Maybe. I don't know how to define that. We'll see.
Thank you so much there. We're going to dig into all that. Yeah. And last but not least, of course, I want to introduce Kitty, who is another podcaster, Loving Without Boundaries. I thoroughly recommend it, which was originally a blog, then became a podcast. And then Kitty started doing speaking and coaching, and then wrote the book, Jealousy Survival Guide, which you probably have heard let me recognize to recommend. Anybody asks me about jealousy, it's one of the top resources I recommend. And I'm so glad that she's here and drove all the way from Pennsylvania. Right?
From Washington, D.C.
From
area.
D.C., I'm sorry. Washington, D.C. area. And to be on the panel. So thank you for coming.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited to be here. Really, really grateful. And I'm grateful, of course, for Effy for having me and meeting everybody here. So just really psyched. My name is Kitty Shambliss, and you already know that I have my blog. I started Loving Without Boundaries about 6 or 7 years ago now, and I had no idea what I was doing when I created that blog. It was kind of more like a live journal to figure out what the hell was going on with my feelings. And then eventually I started the podcast about 3 years ago, and I'll just kind of go back in time and just give you a little bit of my origin story. So I'm a recovering Catholic. So apparently we have some other recovering Catholics here. I went to 12 years of Catholic school. And so all the agita that comes with growing up Catholic and learning. Am I allowed to curse? Yeah. So, all the fucked up things that I was taught in Catholicism, and it took me a really long time. I'm actually having my 50th birthday this year, which I can't believe. It's taken. Thank you. It's honestly taken me my whole life, really, to undo a lot of what I was taught in Catholic school. So I was brought up with a lot of shame and guilt around sex and around what confession is and all of that. I never really understood all of that. So I didn't really start dating until college, and I started doing what good girls were supposed to do. And I thought I was supposed to go find a man to marry and have the 2.5 kids and the picket fence. But, a funny thing happened on that journey, which is I became a cheating serial monogamist, and all my friends were getting married and doing the 2.5 kids. And here I was just kind of doing this upgrade thing. I kept having one person over here, and then I was, he looks better. And if it's going to be the rest of my life with this person, I'm going to, go test that out before I leave, bachelor number one over here. And it became this vicious cycle. And I started to feel bad about it, about all the cheating. And I also went through a period of depression and just a really difficult time in my life. So eventually I met the man who is now my husband, and he was also a former cheater. So we had some just really honest conversations around that. And we just decided at that time, I didn't know the word polyamory at the time. We just decided that we were going to define our relationship the way we wanted to, not based on what society or anybody else was telling us to do. And eventually we did get married, and we just left out the forsake all others and didn't have a traditional wedding. We got married by a lighthouse by a gay man who got internet ordained for me. And then eventually we kind of entered non-monogamy through the swinging community, which was a lot of fun and also helped me not feel emotionally claustrophobic, which I liked. But eventually a friend of mine introduced me to the book, The Ethical Slut. And pretty much my whole life changed after I read even the first 3 pages. And I just thought, all these years, first I was really joyful. I was like, oh my God, I'm polyamorous, and I just had no idea. But then there was another part of me that was really angry because I thought, why didn't anyone ever tell me that this was even a possibility? And so that partly led me eventually to be doing the work that I do now, because I'm very, very passionate about helping other people on their journey, no matter where they're at. If they're, 20 years into the process and an adult, or if it's a teenager or somebody in college, I'm really passionate about helping other people get tools and, help them just get to not stay in the suck as long as I did, because I really struggled with depression and a midlife crisis for about 5 years, and it was awful, and I don't recommend it. So that's partly what led me here to create the blog and the podcast and become a coach, and eventually to write the Jealousy Survival Guide, which is in no small part from learning how to deal with my Metamours.
Yeah. And I'm also interested in your relationship today.
Oh, yes. So I am still married to that same man. we met later in life. So we've been married. We've been together for 15 years, married for 12. And I also have my other partner, my boyfriend, if you want to call him that, who we've been in a relationship for 3.5 years. And he lives with us also. He's lived with us for about 2.5 years now. So it's just me and my two partners. They also have other partners, and I'm sure we'll get to that later, and our fur babies.
And just for clarity, they're not in a relationship with each other.
They are not. They are both heterosexual, so I'm the pivot partner in our household.
And then you cohabit together.
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Great. Awesome. Awesome stories. I can't wait to dig in. And I have a few questions that I want to kind of start things off with. Oh, actually, before I should introduce myself. My name is Effy Blue. I'm a relationship coach. I predominantly work with people who are curious about transitioning into or have hit roadblocks in open relationships. I do that by day. And when I'm not doing that, I'm deeply committed to this community. And that's kind of what I do. And in terms of my own relationship, I cohabit with a partner and in the same apartment, and downstairs my other partner and his wife live, so we all live in a building together. We're currently negotiating a fur baby. So we'll see how that goes. For me, Metamours, or that Metamour relationship is probably the most interesting relationship. It's the one relationship combination, or within all the relationships that could be in an open relationship, the one that I didn't think about. When I discovered polyamory, it was similar idea, similar sort of stories here. I was like, oh, like that's me. And previously had a history of serial infidelity, cheated on my partners. There was a lot of heartbreak and tears. And at some point I decided I wasn't very good at relationships, and I sort of put everything on hold. And at the time poured myself into my career, which was great for my bank account, not so great for my soul. And eventually when I discovered non-monogamy, polyamory, and within that polyamory is a particular sort of style, particular design, I realized that it wasn't that I wasn't good at relationships. I just wasn't good at a particular type of relationship, and that I could design a relationship that I could be good at and I could thrive in. And that's kind of how I came to it. And when I did, I'm a nerd by nature. For me, everything starts with learning, sort of put everything through an intellectual filter. And when I found out about polyamory, I just like read everything, went to all the workshops, spoke to everybody, joined all the groups, like learn, think about everything, all the permutations. Like if I date somebody, what if they date somebody else? What if I date everything else? And the one relationship that I didn't think about was the Metamour relationship, my partner's partner, right? That's what Metamour is, your partner's partner. It just didn't occur to me that was a relationship that existed, and didn't even think about what it would look like. And the more I think about that, to this day, it remains to be the most fascinating part of polyamory. Because if you look at society, if you look at most cultures, they tell us that if two people love the one person, it is essentially chaos. It's considered to be threatening. It's considered to be full of conflict, heartbreak, heartache. There aren't really any positive stories of people more than one person one person loving the one person. Anytime that story is told, it's always somebody dies. There isn't ever like they holding hands in kumbaya. And especially for women, right? If you look at all the archetypes of women, if you think about it, it's always set up to be rivalry, right? So you have the wife and the mistress archetype, and you even have like mother and daughter archetypes. Like there's so many archetypes, or like mother-in-law and wife, right? These are like so many female archetypes where if two women love one man, it's just not gonna be good, And as I found my way into polyamory, I had a very, very different experience, and it was one of the most healing. My first Metamour was one of the most healing people in my life. I went to a boarding school, an all-girls boarding school for 6 years, and I felt like I had enough of women, and I didn't have a great relationship with women, and I was a little afraid of them, to be honest. I was kind of a little afraid of my own kind. And when I walked into that relationship, I was very tentative. I was very like, oh, what's going to happen? I don't want to be threatening. I don't want to be intruding. I was very, very tentative. And she was incredibly open and welcoming and warm and kind, and was kind of just sort of ready to catch me as I slowly leaned into that relationship. And as I did and I relaxed into it, literally like scoop me up, you know, emotionally and sometimes physically. She was she shared so much for me and set this bar of like what you can be, like what that relationship can, what the potential is in that relationship. So I just lucked out with that. That was like my entry. That relationship, the three of us, is actually dissolved, but she remains as one of my best friends and still somebody that I seek a lot of comfort from, and somebody who's very special to me. My current Metamour, the very different relationship. I'm again lucked out. It's a very positive relationship, but it is very different. She and I are very strong-minded, you know, autonomous people that have our own sort of ideas about how we want life to be. And we actually cohabit in the same house, right? And it didn't come so easily as my previous one. And I still maintain that if we weren't dating the same person, we probably wouldn't be friends. But we are, and we choose to live together, and we have made, and we still make every day a conscious effort to have a good relationship. We don't always agree, and we have to navigate around each other all the time. And sometimes it's just about defaulting to respecting a fellow strong woman who I admire and who works really hard. So, you know, if I'm the times that I don't necessarily feel as sort of warm and cuddly, I kind of default to that. I default to respect and admiration of who she is in the world, and then sort of recalibrate to that and negotiate from that place. And of course, I don't want to speak for her, but I imagine that I see that respect reflected back at me. So I've just lucked out with my relationships, with my Metamours, but they're both very different ones, and I'll tell you a little bit more as we explore. That's me. So I want to kind of start with some questions. So as I said, I just hadn't thought about that Metamour relationship. I never thought that I would have a healthy, ongoing relationship that I could nurture with my Metamours. Did you? And how did you imagine they would be?
I guess I also didn't really give it any thought, but it was also partly because we went in through the swinger community. And what we ended up doing was we went to Hedonism, a nudist resort, and we ended up meeting a couple in the hot tub that ironically lived near my hometown. And so that's kind of how we entered the swinger world. But what ended up happening was we did become intimate with them, but also they became really close friends, and they're still really close friends today. And it's been like 14 years. So we're actually not intimate with them anymore, but we're really good friends. So like, the Metamour thing was never even, you know, something to worry about at that point. And then with my husband has two partners. One lives locally near us, and the other one lives not locally in another state. And they're both married and have children. And both of those people were my friends first before anything ever happened in terms of relationships. And also, there's also been occasional intimacy there as well. So it was another thing where it was like, oh, you're my people. And, you know, so there was always kind of that sense of love and belonging and building that trust already. So it kind of took away a lot of that fear. So for me, the challenges with Metamours has really been with my other relationship. So the relationship that I'm in now with my boyfriend, he has a wife who also lives in another state, and they have a son together. And she's very reluctantly in this situation. She also grew up Catholic and still believes a lot of that stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We all get to make our own choices, and but she's very reluctantly in a polycule and would never even use that word, you know? So that's been a very long journey, but it's been getting better and better in that situation. But it's literally taken 3.5 years for us to, you know, hang out in the same room and talk to each other. But each day gets a little bit better. And then I have all kinds of, you know, crazy stories from the relationship I had before that. And, you know, I don't want to hold the mic too long. We'll just see what happens with the conversations.
Thank you. Yeah. What about you, Lola? What did you imagine that Metamour relationship? And if you did, what did it look like?
I didn't think about it. I mean, we were going. I also started out swinging because I was luring him into non-monogamy. I really was. I was like, "Ooh, you want to have a threesome?" I identify as queer at the time. I identified as bi, so I was like, "I'm down. I miss women. Let's do it." And then that turned into going to swing clubs, which we spent a lot more time eating bacon and drinking vodka than we did having sex with other people. But it was still fun. And then Twitter became this place where I started making all of these friends and meeting them in real life. And that is where I met the woman who became his girlfriend, my Metamour. And we were all friends first. And so we were all hanging out and doing things and not necessarily like having sex. And then as things started opening more, the people I was dating were single and didn't have partners. And so that wasn't a thing. And then as they started getting closer and started like, okay, we're dating. She at the time had a girlfriend and a husband, and the husband was like dabbling and trying to date people. And and they have 2 children, and we kind of got thrust into this like family thing. And I come from a very big family who have not been near in a very long time. So I'm just like, people. And it was kind of this exciting thing, but also like I don't even think I knew what a fucking Metamour. I didn't think about it. I was just like, oh, these are people that I liked and liked to spend time with. And that was just kind of where we were. Yeah. And then it all went wrong. No.
As it does sometimes.
Ominous.
Yeah. Thank you. What about you, Amber? Did you think about that?
You taught me the word Metamour. I never knew what it was before I met you, but I had the opposite experience of you in my all-girls school. I was always, and my mom is super feminist, and I was raised to like honor the goddess and appreciate women and lift women up. And I've just always been in sort of that sort of space. So even when people were like catty and weird about like boyfriends or whatever, like I was always like, why are you doing that? Like, fuck that guy. Like, go help the girlfriend out or whatever. So I think it was something that naturally I guess something that I wanted. And now that I know what the word is, it's like, it didn't occur to me that it was a thing when I was into polyamory, but I like where I like what it is. Yeah.
So there are no kind of guides and models for that particular relationship other than these like horror stories. Are there any models that you sort of look at? Do you sort of think of like, oh, I borrow from here and kind of it's a bit like that? Do you think of any models like that you rely on to nurture that relationship?
Like currently I don't borrow from my old relationship. That was not, no, I don't know if y'all know Kevin Patterson, but like he's like pretty big deal in polyamory, but I envy the flow, and the way his Metamours, if you follow him on Facebook, the best thing I ever find is like how much shade a number of his Metamours will throw and like the pylon. And I'm like, that's love. That's like teamwork and love. But that's how you know stuff is going right, when everybody has the same in jokes and the way they can rib that person. And it's like, it's a magical thing to see those women throw shade. And then like, and so good where I'm just like, oh, popcorn emoji, let me be here. But I love how they all aren't, some of them are closer than others. Some of them like will come visit, like his wife was recently in New York visiting one of his Metamours that live here. And like they do those kinds of things, and they do things without him completely. But then there are people who are kind of like on the outskirts, and it's not that there's a problem. It's just like, that's the way it is. And I just like the way there's this, not an expectation of like, you must be at this level, like we got to be sister wives, or I don't want to know you. There's like this nice flow and this in and out. And I try to like be that person who can be I'm flexible to what you want. Yeah.
I would say for me, when I was dealing with my own emotions, I tend to become a big nerd, and I just start reading every single thing I can get my hands on. So I guess first I kind of go outward in terms of looking for research, and kind of go inward in dealing with it. And that's partly why I wrote a blog, was to kind of talk about my feelings. But I think today it's how I go outward is I love going to polyamory conferences and doing events like this, and just like the sea of people that go to those type of events. So there's not really one person I can say I'm model off of. I like kind of enjoying the energy of seeing people who are in a space where they're allowed to be exactly who they can be. But I will say, I think it was the year before last, I did see Cunning Minx speak at RelateCon, the first RelateCon in Boise, Idaho. And she gave a couple workshops that were really great, but I liked the way she framed it, where she said that one of her first relationships with her Metamour, who was married to her partner, that woman did not want to speak to her. And it was very cantankerous. And she basically decided that she was creating a boundary, that was not okay. And she was not willing to be in any relationship where that Metamour was not okay having, like, being civil and being in the same room with her. And I thought, that's cool. That's cool that she got to a place where she was like, no, this is my boundary. So I guess I would say, in that sense, maybe she's a role model. And it just made me think about, what are my boundaries? And I think where I got to is a little more flexible, but that I would prefer, I guess is the way I would describe it, I would prefer to enjoy my Metamour's company and definitely to be civil. And generally, kind of the same thing, like I'm kind of not okay with it. And luckily, like I said, in the beginning with my current boyfriend, we were in that place where she did not want anything to do with me. She did not want to meet me. And it took about 1.5 years. But because it did get better and because I really loved him and I wanted the relationship to work out, we just kept navigating through all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Any thoughts?
There's a lot of nice couples in our community that are really good role models for me. And one that comes to mind, just they've been together for 14 years. And as you say, sometimes they have their house in order. And so I like to talk to them about tips and tricks.
Yeah. I definitely finding people who have their house in order is a good people to hang out with. So most of us kind of have mostly positive stories about our relationship with Metamours, but I also want to acknowledge that it's not always puppy dogs and rainbows, as I like to say. So I want to kind of find out about what are the struggles, if any, you've had with your Metamours.
My latest struggle with my Metamour is that basically the long story short is that it was all in my head. So there's a happy ending, but initially I was having a really hard time just communicating and having time with my partner, not even with my Metamour, because like she wasn't answering my texts or like responding to my invitations for things, or like I got her like a gift and I was trying to like bring it over to her house and she didn't write back to my text. And so in my head, I like built up this whole story in my head that she hated me because I'm like fucking her partner and she thinks I'm scum. And, I just like let myself go down this rabbit hole because I guess I sort of hold my Metamours to like a high standard of communication because maybe I over communicate, but in my mind I'm like, there's no such thing. But I also felt like, I was like, what, why isn't she getting back to me? And it really started affecting not only me, but it really started affecting my time with my partner. And then at some point, like we were all gonna go on an adventure together and I was like, okay, before we go, like I need to get her in a corner and like talk to her and be like, is everything okay? What can I do better? And like I said, it was a happy ending. She's sort of, when we finally did have that conversation, she said, oh, I'm really sorry. I've been really busy with my own things. I have like a lot of stuff going on in my life and it's not personal. I just needed some space and time for myself. And I really like you. I really value you in our lives. I'm happy that we're going on this adventure together. And just my whole body and my whole soul was just like, but it went on for a few weeks and it was, maybe a few months actually. And it was just very challenging. It was very challenging for me. And I noticed it creeping into like a lot more than I thought it would. Like everyday thoughts.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I actually wanted to tag on a question at the end, which you answered, which is then given the struggles, what sort of conscious steps are you taking to solve those problems or to address them? And then I think often the answer is communication, right? And that's kind of the path that you went down on.
Right, but what do you do if someone doesn't communicate back with you or doesn't answer your texts or your emails or your phone calls or like your little notes to reach out? Like what do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I know that we've talked about it before as well. And I think just to consider that everybody has different expectations from this relationship. As I said, there's no models, there's no guidelines, there's no like a name, like you can't point to that. That's how it should be. And I definitely have worked with people who come, cover the range of, I want to be in a don't ask, don't tell. Like, I don't even want to know this person exists. And the way they manage it is they will have a slot in the calendar that essentially blocks off the time, and the one partner is not going to be at home, and the other partner just doesn't want to know what happens during that time. And there's sort of that one end of the spectrum where people just don't want to make room, don't even want to know that their metamours exist, to all the way to kind of where we are, which is like, living together and loving and sharing and all that kind of stuff, and anywhere in between. And I think it's just at some point, you kind of have to realize, kind of figure out where your metamour is. I think that's really important in these relationships, kind of where your metamour is, and to sort of stick with what, where you end, where they start. And I think that definitely has been a learning experience for me. What about you, Kitty? Do you
want me to share some of the ugly?
Sure. Yeah.
So the boyfriend I had before my current boyfriend, he was really like my first polyamorous relationship, like full-on poly relationship outside of my marriage. And we were together for about 5 years, and he was an actor, and he was passionate and sexy, and poor, and and kind of, he would end up, and also younger than me. So he would end up choosing as his partners kind of these similar, like kind of young, like a little bit like dramatic, actresses, maybe poor, maybe not. And he was also very interested in group sex. So we would have these weird experiences where he'd be kind of like pressuring me to, jump in the sack with whoever he was seeing. And so that's partly when I had to really learn how to deal with some of my jealousy or just my various emotions. And then he also was so broke that he ended up moving in with us more out of financial need. And we were, like I said, together for 5 years. So towards the last period, we ended really badly, where I sang I was a lead singer in rock bands for about 18 years. And for me, gig days were very intense. I'd practice my music all day long. I'd get the jitters and the shits and everything. And so I'm putting on my makeup and I'm getting ready for this gig, and the doorbell rings. It's dark out. I'm like, who the heck's coming to the house now? And I answer the door, and it's a sheriff. And I'm like, hello, how are you? And he asked for my boyfriend's name. Was he home? And I said, no, he's not home. And he said, well, does he live here? And he said, I said, yes, he does. And he said, well, I have a restraining order for him. And I said, by who? And he gave a woman's name I'd never heard of before. So apparently he was cheating on me with a woman that he pissed off so much that he got a restraining order against him. So that's a pretty bad Metamour story for you. And I forgave him that one time. Fast forward about 4 months later, we're having a Sunday. It looks all pretty, like me and my boyfriend and my husband were having brunch, and it's all nice. And I get a text, and it was a text from a woman I did not know was my Metamour, and she said, by the way, I'm sleeping with your boyfriend, and I'm pissed off at him because he won't tell you about it. So I was like, all right, one time, shame on me. Second time, you're out. And so that was this big, dramatic, awful, awful breakup, as you can imagine. So I think it is fair to, especially people, even though I wrote a book or I speak on panels, that doesn't mean that things are all puppy dogs and rainbows all the time. And, how do you think you learn all the lessons? Sometimes it's by stepping in a pile of shit. I'm going to avoid that shit next time. Not that you can always avoid it. And also with my husband, sometimes part of the reason I wrote the book on jealousy as I did was when I was in that structure where I was with that particular original boyfriend and he was with his girlfriend, they were very affectionate and cuddly and cute and adorable. And my boyfriend at the time was not. So I was dealing with a lot of jealous feelings around scarcity, around the affection and the touching and all the I love yous. And, so that fed into me writing the book. So those are some of the background stories, and I can go on and on. So I don't know how much you want me to.
Sure. I'm also interested if you would mind talking a bit about your boyfriend's wife, right? Because that's a relationship that's evolving, and I'm really interested in how it's evolving. It wasn't great, but you said it's getting better.
Right. So with that, at the beginning, they had a very different history where they went through a rocky part of their marriage where they didn't know if they were going to stay together. And that's when my boyfriend kind of decided that he was polyamorous. And so they almost broke up, but they decided for whatever reason, whether it was because they had a son together, a young boy or not, they decided to try and work that out. But he was dating other people, but at that time, I'm sure she was healing from, there was some infidelity that happened. And so I'm sure she was probably angry about that. So she didn't want anything to do with anyone that he was seeing. And so I was maybe girlfriend number 3 or 4 on that journey. And so of course she wanted nothing to do with me. So, and I was in this space where I'm like writing a book and I'm on panels and speaking at, so it was very difficult for me when I was like, what do you mean she doesn't want to meet me? I'm awesome. But also, like, it went against, like, I've worked really hard to come from, values of integrity and transparency and honesty. So it was really hard for me. Like, I wasn't interested in a don't ask, don't tell sort of situation. So it's been a really long journey. And I knew you were going to ask me this question. So I tried to think about, how did we slowly get to a place where we are now, which isn't perfect, because for me now where we are is she's a teacher. So they see each other every couple months. We live in the DC area, Washington, DC, and she lives in Florida with their son. So she's kind of like a single mother down there. And she's not, of course, seeing anyone else because she's really monogamous at heart. So we're at the point where, because she's a teacher, she will come stay with us for 3 weeks in the summertime. And I was telling Effy earlier, like, anybody coming to stay with you for 3 weeks is challenging. But then when it's your reluctant Metamour, and I've struggled from infertility, so also having an 8-year-old around the house has its own, like, there's joy about it, but it's also, kind of tugs at my heartstrings. So there's lots of difficulty around that. But I'm still happy about where we are, but it's taken us 3.5 years. So for me, some of the things that helped on that journey was really first working on my own feelings first, which again is partly what prompted me to write the book, was doing all that research and just figuring out, how do I deal with my own feelings of whether it's insecurity or jealousy or fear of abandonment, who knows where that comes from. And also just really practicing radical self-care, a lot of compassion and self-care. And so for me, it really starts inside of myself first. And then also when I'm ready, once I figure out what I need maybe from somebody else, like asking them, knowing that they have the ability to say yes or no. Nonviolent communication, right? We don't make demands, we make requests. So, working up the courage and the vulnerability to say, hey, I'm feeling really shitty today or lonely or sad. Do you think maybe you can give me some reassurance or some appreciation? Or can you just even appreciate, like, when your family comes to visit for 3 weeks, it's really fucking hard. And just, having that candid conversation. And sometimes that's not easy because sometimes he may not be in a space where he's ready to give me those things. So I have to be in a space to hear no and then go back to the self-care, right? And I would say also just, I joke around with my boyfriend that he's in my life to teach me patience. So just really constantly working on patience, and not just with him or in that relationship, but just patience in general, because we do live in an immediate gratification sort of society, and just knowing, like, it can take years to build relationships. And also it's not just about me and my needs. I want to respect her, and if I really want to get to know her, I also have to respect her boundaries and honor where she's at. And so there's also patience for her, and, to not try and change her or where she's at, and not try and change my boyfriend and where he's at, and to respect that they're trying to raise a son together, so to give them space and to really honor that. And as far as my direct relationship with that Metamour, I just tried to be like double down on the kindness, it started out like I gave her a gift through my boyfriend. I'm like, here, give her this little gift. It's from me, and that kind of just opened the door. And I just tried to, like, very gently let her know, like, I'm not scary, I'm a nice person, and just keep reinforcing that over and over again. And then by doing that, like tell your wife I said hello, send her this cute little Bitmoji, very little steps, just building brick by brick by brick. And it took us a year and a half before she finally was willing to stop by our house just to meet my husband and I for about 15 minutes. And that was funny. Cause I found out, like, I got a text from my boyfriend. He's like, we're going to stop by the house and pick up some clothes before we go to our hotel. And I was like, oh my God, and I texted my husband. I was like, you got to turn around and come back from Home Depot because we got to clean the house. It was hilarious. Like, if anyone was watching me, it was hilarious. And then as soon as they pulled up, I'm like, hi, it is so nice to meet you. But, so just little baby steps, and now they stay for 3 weeks at a time. So it's just, now I give them Christmas presents and birthday cards, so just kind of reinforcing it constantly.
You're good. You're good. Yeah, it's amazing, and I think so much of that resonates with me too. I think definitely when in doubt, just defaulting to respect is definitely where I found to negotiate that space, and also respecting the boundaries. Same with me. I think my current Metamour relationship is all about respecting mutual boundaries, and because we actually have to also share physical space. So there is this like very gentle, friendly dance that we kind of do with one another, knowing that we both need space, and we give each other space, and we take space when we need to as well, because we both can be intense together. So yeah, definitely. It's just like constant, pleasant work. It's work, but it's like consciousness around that relationship as well. So yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well, tell us.
So when we started really getting into the like, okay, we're with them, I always looked at myself as we are, even though I wasn't dating her, and I dabbled, like we talked about earlier, like kind of her husband and I had crushes, but she kind of made that a hard thing to pursue. And she, at the time when we met, had a girlfriend who was also married. So there were 6 of us. So we had the first year and change, we had a lot of like Insta orgies, because you got 6 people. You don't need to go anywhere. So they would like come for the weekend, and we would like set up the living room and like all do different things, like have sex in different configurations and whatever, because you got 6 people. And I know, it's like, and it was a lot of fun. But it was also this time of like trying to learn how to communicate with this person. And so while we would have these friendly text and conversations, there were these moments where like her girlfriend at the time and I were really bonding, because we were the 2 Black women in a relationship with a whole bunch of white people. And we would sit and talk about some of the stuff that was happening, because there was a lot of boundary pushing and boundary breaking done by my ex and the girlfriend. And so there was a lot of like not talking, like not saying like, hey, we're going to hook up or we're going to go do this thing, and just like, oh, you're fucking. Oh, okay. Like I'll go out, and not knowing, like, and we had all kind of set like rules or boundaries, and she had set a lot, but then would break the things she wanted to break for her own gain. And it was becoming a thing. So her girlfriend at the time and I would just like vent. And we would vent over text. And then she decided we're practicing radical honesty, which meant I get to go through your phone. That's how she like framed it for us. So she would just take her girlfriend's phone and then read all the things that I was like kind of venting, like, hey, I'm really upset about this thing. And then it would get thrown in my face in the middle of dinner or things like that. So all of these things were like, because I was new and they felt like red flags, but being with people who were in polyamory and having me being told, no, you're just jealous. So I got told I was jealous a lot, and I did a lot of work. I read like the Ethical Sluts chapter, that literal chapters falling out of the book from how many times I've gone through it and highlighted. And every conference I went to or anything that had anything about jealousy, I was there because I was being told I was the bad guy. This was my problem. But at the same time, I was also dealing with somebody who was supremely dramatic and very, I don't know, jealous and greedy. And I say those things in a way of like, literally her husband was inside of me. We were all at orgy, and she had, and I'm very like, I kind of have a hard time like focusing and I get like out of my head and start paying attention to people in the room. And like, I guess my ex and they were having some issues because he had performance anxiety. And I just remember her pushing him off of her and grabbing her husband. And I'm like, Kegels, like, I mean, no, like we're fucking. And then the next morning she said, we all rejected her and we were all awful. And this is what we're trying to make pancakes. There's kids who are waking up and she's crying and that everybody rejected her. And I'm like, y'all were literally, there's 6 people. You had sex with 2 people. I watched you do it. And then you interrupted my sex and you're mad and you're crying. And I'm like, you're lucky I haven't punched you in your face yet. Because I'm an 8. I don't know if you do the Enneagram. I'm a Leo, I'm an 8, and I'm a black woman. All those things together can be napalm. And so looking back, but I kept being told I'm the bad guy. You're jealous. You're this, you're that. And it was like, okay. And I dealt with that for a really, really long time. And we had a lot of good spots where we would get into this really great groove and I would communicate with her and we were doing okay. But when it came to my ex, she would just shut down. And it would get to the space where she'd go, I don't want to hear things from you. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. He's shitty at communicating. And you know this, and I know this. And he literally will not tell you things until like right before. So I'm trying to stop there from being problems between us because this keeps happening. And she dramatic, no, and you're being awful and you're trying to break us up. And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to have a relationship with you that isn't combative. And so there was a lot of that. And really, end of the day, it was a lot of me doing work that was maybe, I won't say unnecessary, but a lot of me feeling like the villain. Towards the end, they were gaslighting me beyond gaslighting. They were like, you have an anger problem. Like she, not a therapist, but she worked in like with folks with mental illness. She worked in homes and things. So she had a lot of language I didn't have and like would constantly diagnose me and tell me I had like associative identity disorder and I was bipolar. And she would like send me things to read and say, this is you. And so much so that when the relationship ended, I was literally trembling all the time. I had to like ask friends about reality and like, is it weird that I don't want to come home and sleep in the bed that he's going to fuck her in while I'm away on a business trip and he's telling me he'll just change the sheets? And I'm like, you told me you want a divorce. I still have to sleep in a bed with you. Could you just please not have her in the apartment while I still have to live with you? And they didn't care. And then I just came home to a new bed. Like that was how deep it went. And I finally went to a therapist and I was like in tears, like, something's wrong with me and I fuck everything up and I think I have an anger problem. And he just goes, can I ask you a question? He's like, are all your partners white? And I was like, they were. And he was like, it's not you. It's white people don't know how to deal with how people of color tend to express things. We get loud and we actually talk about it and we're not passive aggressive. And it's true. And I'm not labeling all of y'all, but like, it's a thing. We grow up differently. We're very blunt. And this is the household I grew up in. Like, you got a problem with me? I'm going to tell you about the problem. It's probably going to be loud. We're going to take care of it. I'm not going to do things like not text you for, 10 days and then tell you have a mental illness. So that was a lot of my stuff. And coming out of all of this and going to therapy and I hate saying like people save you, but I don't know how I would have functioned not having my partner and his wife in my life, because I was coming out of this space of just feeling like not just a failure. I'm a horrible human being. I brought this on myself and like, oh, maybe this isn't true. And maybe I'm not this bad person. And so having a partner who's like, I love you. And I don't see those things he sees in you. And I also understand he's like, I get you get fiery. And my Metamour is part Mexican. So he's like, I live with this. And he's like, no, you're passionate and it's okay for you to be passionate. And he's like, when you have somebody who talks to you, like he's a therapist, he doesn't therapize me, but he also is really good at communication and also good at like, I see you, you don't trust anybody. You're really like shaky. I'm not mad at you about those things. And having somebody like see me so clearly, but also be okay with the really shitty parts of me that were just right at the surface made it so much easier for me to communicate like, hey, I'm scared, or this is where I am. And then when it came to my new Metamour, just how much damage had been done with having somebody who did the kind of things she did in the relationship. And like, people go, oh, she ended your marriage. I'm like, no. It takes more than that. Like, he let that happen, and he also fed into it. And then, so it's a whirlwind. And I did do some things in our relationship, but at the end of the day, you know, it's not just her, but I will say she did a lot of dismantling of me, and not necessarily with the relationship, because they were trying to push me to ask for the divorce. That's what I've found out now, that they were trying to fuck me up so much that I asked for the divorce. I know, it's so nice when you start talking to your ex in a clear way. But with my current Metamour, having somebody who from the beginning of our relationship reached out to talk about us. We rarely would talk about her husband. We were getting to know each other. She loves books, and like, this is the stuff, and we talk, and she Disney bounds. I don't know if y'all know what that is, where you like wear the colors of a character, but you don't necessarily dress like the character. So every morning I get a bound, and she's just really about us building our relationship. And that's how that started. We were building a relationship while I was falling in love with him. And my relationship with her had nothing to do with whether or not I was with him. It was about the two of us creating a friendship. And then as things moved on, when things started getting hard for her because they were newly opened up, like, I was not his first partner, but it was like when I met him, they were closed. And then like the following year or so, they were like, oh, he's like, we're open. Would you like to hook up? But they had been in relationships, and she was still in a very unsteady place. And having come from that, it was really easy for me to be like, I see you, and like, I'm here for you. But she never put that on me. Like, it was always, this is where I am. This is not you. And she would express like her fears and things, but it was never in a like, I don't want you to be with him type of way, or I don't want you to be with her. It was like, this is where I am. Yeah.
Sounds like healing.
It's a lot of
Sounds like healing from a lot of trauma. Yeah. No, thank you. I like that it at least has a happy ending of like in healing and a new positive relationship. Yeah. So I can ask a million questions, but this is about you guys, about the foxes, and this is why we ask you to bring your curiosity. Any questions?
Hi, I had a question, and I think you both mentioned this, but how did you manage the feelings of having a friend then become a Metamour, rather than like your partner finding the person, but it's like your friend first? And I feel like that's where I would struggle more with like the jealousy of like the friendship, and like, you know, my friend in a way that I don't know my friend.
Yeah. So it's also a lot of a sort of relationship transition. You have to kind of manage the transition as well.
So my husband has been in that relationship, I want to say like 8 years now. And so for me, it's a little bit about loss, actually, because she and I had become really close, even though she's a little bit of an introvert. We ended up becoming like email friends, even though she only lives 20 minutes away. And because she's an introvert, she would like, share her feelings over email. And we were, just becoming these really great friends. And what ended up happening, we call it playdar. If you start to wonder if she was married at the time, and we had playdar, like, are they in an open relationship? I don't know. And eventually we found out that they were. But then what ended up happening was she ended up getting a divorce. And while she was, and I won't go into why, but it was a very awful, traumatic divorce for her. And we had just bought our house. So she ended up coming and staying with us for a few weeks so that she didn't have to be in the house with her husband at the time. And that's when she started to get close with my husband. And of course, then we all, knew that we were all in an open style relationship. And that was the beginning of their relationship. But what ended up happening is our friendship has completely changed. So I kind of like lost that friendship. And there were days or times in my life where I was kind of sad about that. And I guess also in my whole journey of consensual non-monogamy, I've just kind of started to accept that I lose friends. But I mostly lose friends from the monogamous world. But I did lose her in the consensual non-monogamous world because I lost her to my husband in a way. But I guess I've just kind of gotten used to it. I know that probably sounds depressing, but it's just true. It's just true. So, and there was only like moments of jealousy. And now I've just come to a place of acceptance about it. I love her. I still love her. I just love her in a different way. And we're just not close friends. But we're good friends. And I know that I can call on her for absolutely anything. Her daughter is our goddaughter. Her husband is awesome. He's a really great friend of ours. He just happens to be monogamous, but he's like, I'm Dutch. I think this is all great. Do whatever you want, and so our relationship has just changed, I guess. So, but I did lose the closeness, but I still think our relationship is awesome. So I guess maybe that's why I'm not really sad about it. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I'm actually can I ask a follow-up question? What would you, if you could, what is the distinction of where the relationship has changed? Like, so what are the sort of distinctions between now we're close friends and now we're Metamours and it's a different relationship and we're not friends anymore?
Well, I guess now we're kind of like, we consider each other family. But in terms of like our day-to-day friendship, it's kind of more of like, the word superficial doesn't feel right, but we're just not close. We're not close emotionally, but I know if I was in jail, she would bail me out. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Whereas I guess before we were really emotionally close, like we were starting to become best friends even. Okay. And so that's what I lost.
Cool. And then do you, is there a change also? What about the topics that you discuss? Because I know that one of the questions that we discussed earlier is like, once you become Metamours, what are the boundaries of what you're discussing? So was that before, like maybe you would talk about how you like certain things about your and then now you don't because there's that relationship happening?
Yeah, I guess when we were in that like really close relationship, she would talk more about her feelings. And then we started to get to the point where she would talk about her feelings about my husband. And then something snapped. Maybe it was when she fell in love with him or I don't know. But then she just kind of stopped talking. So she just doesn't talk to me about her feelings anymore. Definitely not about my husband. But it's funny because I don't actually even feel jealous about it. But she doesn't talk about it, But we'll talk about lots of other things.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Hi, I'm Doug, and my question is, so some of you, in your example, for example, you're married, and then you have other relationships, and I think a couple of you have that sort of scenario. I was under the impression that in polyamorous relationships, one person can't be primary, but maybe I'm wrong, and particularly if there's a mono-poly connection, obviously that adds its own complexity. But what is your experience, and is there a place, and if so, under what conditions, for one relationship to be the primary relationship in a polyamorous situation without it being judgmental or, unfair, I guess?
Yeah, you can do what you want to do. You can have a primary, you can do hierarchy, you can do non-hierarchy. I think hierarchy gets a bad rap sometimes, and then there's like couple privilege and all those things. I
have to look some of these up, but okay, keep going.
We can talk after. With ours, it became less about, it was like more of not a hierarchy, but priority. We lived together. We were splitting bills. Like, I'm sorry, like we make this, if we share a bank account, that other person doesn't get to decide where my money goes. That's a different thing. Whereas if we didn't have the same bank account, I don't care what you do, but you're not going to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks on my dime, and I don't get to go. Fuck that. So it's for us, it became not about like hierarchy, but like we live together. These are things. So yes, we need to talk about when the other is going away, because it's like, who's going to be with the cat? Who's going to wash the laundry? Who's doing these things? Who's taking care of the home? Whereas if we all lived together, that would have been a different story, because this part that I think I missed out, they lived in Maryland. So they were 4 hours away. And so there was a lot of like traveling. But I guess it's different for everybody. Like now, I think the relationship that I'm a part of as like the girlfriend, I don't know if what they call it, but I respect it. They share a house, they have a kid, they don't share money. So it makes it easier for him to like decide to buy me presents or do things because it's not coming out of her bank account. But they do negotiate time. So like we all sit down and talk about like, what conferences are we going to this year? Because that's how I get to see him without it costing all of us so much money. Or what are we doing this week? We get each other's schedules. We talked about like summer plans and like, okay, so when are you free? When is she get vacation? When is your daughter going to go to the grandparents? So we have like, okay, what are we doing? But at the end of the day, I don't live there. I'm in New York. They're in California. Who am I to say like, I need to come first when I'm not even in your state, let alone your home. So I respect that discussions need to be had between them before, but I'm privy. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about it. We all talk about it. I kind of go like, oh, this is what I have going on. And so like, yep, you'll talk about it and we'll figure it out. So yeah.
I think also just to add to that, I mean, I think polyamory is like Lola said, as you make it, right? And in my coaching, I coach around this idea of relationship by design. So I almost the work that I do is get the relationship, design the relationship, and then put a label on it for shorthand, rather than sort of deciding what polyamory is and try to fit into that, right? Because then it's kind of duplicating what you do with monogamy. Because monogamy is essentially a one size fits all structure that most of us are trying to fit into, and if that fits you, great, like that is your model, go for it. If it doesn't fit you, and then what, right? And then I think that's the rest of it is like, well, and then what? And then you actually get to kind of design it yourself. And as you design it, I think instead of thinking like, what is this language, and find a definition for it and kind of fit yourself into that, the process is almost the other way around. Like, design the relationship, figure out what it looks like for you in a way that everyone's thriving, and then like find the nearest label for shorthand, but also like, I always say, like, labels will get you onto the same page with somebody. You need to have a conversation to get into the same paragraph. So, and if somebody says to you, I'm poly, a good question to ask is, what does that look like? And get them to tell you, like, what does that look like for them? Because I'm sure even around this room, if we asked 10 people who identify as polyamorous, they'll give you 10 different designs. So, yeah. Cool. Another question?
Hi, I'm Em. I was wondering, so a lot of this has been about Metamour to Metamour relationships. As I know a couple of you are in this circumstance as well. As the pivot, or even as the Metamours, where do you think the pivot's role is in helping keep a V function when it's not a triad, but when it is a V?
Or the pivot, right?
Yeah,
in the same household.
Yeah, so I'm definitely the pivot in our household for sure, even though they also have other partners, so in their own way they're the pivot. But I guess for me, and I think this is also probably very individual. For me, I do kind of consider at this point both of my partners both a primary, and I do kind of prescribe a little bit to the hierarchical thinking, at least because some of it's just on paper too, right? I've got a marriage certificate with my husband, and we own the house together. And I don't have that with my boyfriend, but we are all living in the same house together. So in terms of how we handle it, I tend to come from a place of, I want to be able to have enough energy to give to both of them as much as possible. And I'm a worrywart. So I also am constantly like, I'm trying not to worry. Like, are you okay? Are you okay? Am I giving you enough attention? And I'm getting better about that. And also they're both very secure people. And I just, in the beginning, when we were first kind of navigating all this, I just kept asking them, I'm like, if you need something, you'll let me know, right? And they're like, yes, and they would keep giving me reassurance. So at this point, I kind of, believe them. I'm like, all right, if you need me, you'll let me know. And in terms of how we run the household, we were joking that this question always comes up. So just so happens the way our house is, I share the master bedroom with my husband. And then my boyfriend has like the whole bottom of the house that has, it's almost like its own little apartment. And I literally just, sometimes I sleep upstairs and sometimes I sleep downstairs. And it just kind of is based on who has to get up in the morning, who needs a ride to work, that kind of a thing. And so it kind of just flows very nicely at this point. But I mean, in the beginning, when we were trying to figure it out, there is a lot of emotional labor I felt I was doing, trying to make sure that they were both okay. And, the relationship with my husband always tends to feel a little bit more secure because we've been together so long. And so it was always making sure that my boyfriend felt secure. And also because it's not his house, how do we make him feel welcome? And we're kind of constantly working on all that. And then I also just see, like, for example, my boyfriend being the pivot partner between me and his wife. I actually really feel for him when they are coming for those 3 weeks. I'm like, wow, how is he handling all this right now? Because that's going to be really challenging.
I can also take, because I'm a pivot in one of my relationships where we live together. For me, it's always been our design, I should say, is kitchen table poly, which means that ideally we sit around the table and break bread and sort of share good vibes. So what I try to do for my partner and my partners is to provide that kitchen table. So every now and then we'll do a family brunch or something there where we all get together and hang out. And I feel like that nurtures that relationship, and that's usually my contribution to that relationship.
So observing a pivot, because I'm not the pivot, my partner is something we've learned is that I stay out of their business. I know what's going on, but I don't try to address things that are happening between them with her. That's not my business. I sometimes, he will ask my opinion on things and I will talk to him. And it's always, he's like, oh, what do you think? Should I? And I'm like, maybe, but don't do it that way because she'll slap you in your face. Where I've become a little bit of an advocate of knowing her, I feel really good about as much as I know her. But when it comes to things where it's about her emotions or something with us, then we talk. She and I talk and we dabble in that way. But he's really good at saying oh, she's feeling uncomfortable. I'm like, I'll bring it up. we'll talk. And so that's where he's done a really great job as a pivot, is not trying to talk to us about what, I don't hear, I know relationship stuff, but he doesn't bring that to me and he doesn't take that to her, but he's kind of there of hey, somebody's feeling a little whatever. And okay, we can all talk. Let's all get on a phone or Marco Polo or whatever the hell we're using at the time. I love Marco Polo, but yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question as it relates to that and kind of pivoting? So as the pivot, it sounds like you're saying that he maintains responsibility to not overshare with you so that it doesn't impact your relationship with the Metamour.
Right. Because if she's having a spin out moment and feeling really again, you're having a spin out moment, we all get there where you're this is me. There were a time when you said that, I was oh, I've been there with her. I was she doesn't like me and she thinks I'm trying to ruin their marriage. And it wasn't. It was just he was being really shitty about. He was just telling me things and telling her things, but he has ADHD and he wasn't completing sentences. And we were what the fuck is going on? And when we all three spoke to each other, it was oh, this is your fault. We've been on the same page. This is your fault. So when we have those spin outs, I appreciate that I'm able to be about her, oh, I feel kind of angry about something she's doing and just venting a little bit. And then he's oh, it's not like that. But he doesn't go run and tell her that. He'll say you know what I'm saying? I think we all need to get on the phone, because again, I don't get to see her often. I at all. We talk to each other on FaceTime and things like that. And I actually spent New Year's with them, New Year's Eve, a week. So that was a good where we're we like each other. Yeah.
I win this relationship. Any other questions? Great. So before I wrap up, I want to sort of go down and ask something for everyone to add, and then I want to wrap up. What would be the one piece of advice that you'd give to people in a way that will help their relationship with their Metamours? What is the one thing that you've figured out within your relationship through experience that you want to share with everyone and be this is going to be my pro tip?
So as a Metamour, I always try to practice I hate the phrase happy wife, happy life, but I'm there to make their life better. If I am detracting in any way, that's going to be a problem for me. So I want to be there to enrich. And that's always my goal, is I don't want anybody to ever feel I'm taking away. I want to be adding to. And if it's ever in a space where I feel I'm taking away, I want to deal with that. And maybe that's not a relationship, because I don't want somebody overly focusing and then fucking things up. I'm a big person who'll be oh, Like, did you talk to her about that first? Because I don't want to be that. Like, I've had that in my life, and it's a very destructive force, and I don't want to ever be that. So yeah, it's just like try to keep my side of the street clean and be good to everybody, not just the person you're fucking.
Good advice. Good advice. I take that advice.
I would say, I think it overlaps with what you said, but I would say empathy, to really come from a place certainly of self-empathy, if you're having a rough day, but trying to, really get in the other person's shoes and have empathy for wherever they are on the journey, and also to help them feel safe. And so helping them feel safe might also be not just not being blirtatious in a bad moment, and sometimes just looking inward before you speak. So I think empathy and safety, I would say.
I would say be kind and be genuine, like in yourself, and also ask for what you need from every person in the relationship, whether it's your metamour or your partner or any of the other extended people.
Nice. And I think what I'll add to that is see your metamour as an individual before you see them as your metamour, before you see them as like their relationship with your partner or whatever that is. But just see the individual first before you put them into context of everything else, and see if you can appreciate the person, who they are, and remain curious about them. So just remain curious, get to know them if it's available. And I think that just seeing them as an individual without out of the context of the relationship is a good place to start. Is what would be my little advice. So I'm going to wrap up. Before I do, I just want to say a quick round of thank yous. First and foremost, thank you so much, my panelists. They make it look so easy. It's not. It's brave work to sit here and share and tell all the stories. So I really appreciate it. This is what makes it. A quick thank you to people who support me behind the scenes. Thomas, who does our audio, both produces the records and produces the podcast. Thank you. My assistant Laura, who makes things happen, and Jackie, who is the engine behind all this and keeps me sane. And of course, thank you Foxes for coming out and supporting us. And we'll see you soon. Until then, stay curious.
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 Stay curious.